Hello to all the documentary lovers and filmmakers and friendly netizens out there. Welcome to the first installment of iWonder's Q&A series, I Wonder Who, in which we'll be meeting wonderful people in front of and behind the camera of some of the exceptional documentaries available on iWonder. For the uninitiated, iWonder is a streaming service dedicated to documentaries and current affairs, combining favourite documentaries from festivals around the world with critically acclaimed, hard-hitting topical films, series and shorts. Our curation marries trending news stories and trusted journalism with captivating real-life stories about the people and events that shape our world. iwonder.com is available in Australia, New Zealand, across South and Southeast Asia and Hong Kong. And you can also download and watch via our Apple and Android mobile and TV apps. So there's really no excuse not to check us out and find us and watch some amazing movies. I'm Alex, iWonder's head of content. And without further ado, I'm really thrilled to introduce my guest, Ursula Macfarlane. Ursula is the director and producer of Untouchable, The Rise and Fall of Harvey Weinstein. Her work has drawn multiple award wins and nominations, and of her 23 directing credits, there's the BAFTA-nominated One Deadly Weekend in America, Charlie Hebdo, 3 Days Live, 3 Days That Shook Paris, and also Breaking Up with the Joneses. I think we've got a trailer to play, so it'd be great to play that now.
I tried to tell people, so you better keep your mouth shut. I saw a lot about how the machine works in terms of burying scandals and settlements. Nobody was ever going to win against this guy.
I was hearing stories which you could dismiss as rumor.
I was being told these women are crazy.
You have to do something.
Why yesterday you touched my breast?
Oh, please, I'm sorry. Just come on, I'm used to that.
Huge turning point.
I couldn't believe that they were telling the story as though they were writing about me.
Mr. Weinstein intends to enter a plea of not guilty.
The most sinister aspect is that the system enabled it.
Power. Everybody's getting a piece of it.
When you pick out the most grotesque, there's the sense that, okay, we've taken care of the problem.
It's not over. It continues.
Hi, Ursula. Thank you so much for joining me on our first Q&A.
Oh, I'm so delighted to be here, and I'm just so happy that the film is, making its way across the world. It's been in Europe and the US a lot, North America, and then it's headed to India, and now it's headed over as far as you guys. And it just gives me so much pleasure because I think, it's raising very general issues and questions that I think a lot of people around the world can relate to, even if they've never gone anywhere near the media or the film business. So I'm so happy.
Thank you. I mean, 100%. It is such, the themes in the film, touching on Me Too movement and just in general, sexual harassment and abuse, whether that's in the workplace or at home, it is such a universal theme. And that's why it was so important for us. I wanted to make sure that we, audiences in our part of the world, Asia and Australia and New Zealand, got to see it as well. It's so important to us, and just watching that trailer again, it's so haunting that especially Harvey's phone call, and it's just such powerful stuff. And I'm super excited to kind of crack into it. But just first of all, can you tell our viewers, where in the world are you right now?
So I'm in England. I'm in the UK. I'm in a place called Suffolk.
I didn't know you were a Suffolk girl. I'm a
London girl, but we're just staying out here at the moment, trying to keep away from COVID, which thankfully, dare I speak too soon, is beginning to go down. But I've been in London, and it's been it's been very tough, and I've got friends who've had it, and I'm sure all of us do, and it's very nasty. So we're lucky to be here in the countryside. It's really beautiful, quite near the sea. So
yeah, gorgeous.
I'm not hear my dog barking at any given moment, so I apologise. I'll try to sort of tie him up somewhere.
No worries. I got a puppy for quarantine, and he's out at the moment. But yeah, they can get in the way in the back of these things. But with coronavirus in the UK and lockdown, what's been keeping you sane? What's been keeping you going through these last few months?
To be honest, I'd love to say that I've done loads of creative work and played the piano better and all of that, but it's been sort of the simple things in a way. It's being with family, it's doing lots of cooking, it's doing lots of yoga, going for lots of walks, being with my dog. He's going to get terrible separation anxiety when we all go back to offices and things. And I have, I've been doing some personal little film creative projects, I'm doing a feature doc at the moment, which I'm trying to keep going, but that's been quite difficult because it's an American story, and we need to got the ending of the film yet, so we need to go back there, which obviously at the moment is
difficult. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's going a bit crazy over there, so we're keeping an eye on that.
Can you share any more details with us, or is it under super tight wraps?
Yeah, I mean, I can just briefly tell you roughly what it's about, but I probably can't tell much more. But it's a very different kind of story. It's about it's a family story. It's a mistaken identity story about a kidnap.
Oh wow!
And a foundling, a baby being found abandoned. So it's kind of two mysteries. The kidnap of a baby and then a toddler being found abandoned on the street, and how those mysteries collide. But it's all the things I'm interested in. It's family, it's relationships, it's cover-ups, deceit, redemption.
Everything iWonder's interested in as well, to be honest. And actually listening to the themes there, it sort of brings me on to my first question, sort of as a great segue. But first of all, I guess I'll just quickly do an overview of Untouchable before we go into some questions. So, for those viewers who haven't seen Untouchable yet, it's Untouchable, the rise and fall of Harvey Weinstein. It really shines a spotlight on the decades-long system of sexual and emotional abuse that the megastar movie producer inflicted on rising female actors as well as employees during his time at the top of the Hollywood food chain. In the film, we hear from ex-colleagues, people in the industry, and many of his accusers, some of whom had never spoken publicly their truth before. So since 2017, a little bit of context around the story, since 2017, over 80 women stepped forward to accuse Weinstein of sexual harassment, assault and rape. And although Harvey, sort of consistently denied any allegations of non-consensual sex, he was found guilty by jury in New York of a felony sex crime and rape in February of this year, and eventually sentenced to 23 years in prison. A separate case has been filed in California since. But it's really a case that many saw as critical in being able to better sort of bring to account and make accountable powerful men for harassment in the workplace. And it's a sort of a scandal that projected the Me Too movement worldwide and empowered a lot of women to highlight the inequality they've experienced in their everyday lives. So without further ado, let's get stuck into talking a bit more about the filmmaking process, and then obviously within that framework touching on those bigger themes. So yeah, going back to what you were just saying, Ursula, about what really the kind of topics that really draw you, it does seem like from your past work, whether it's One Deadly Weekend or Charlie Hebdo or Tsunami survivor stories, it really feels that Harvey Weinstein scandal sort of fits in your wheelhouse, as it were. But what in particular drew you to tackle this subject and take on the responsibility of telling the deeply personal stories that it would no doubt entail?
Well, I was asked by Simon Chin, who's big producer who did such as Sugar Man and Man on Wire, some incredible films. And he called me up not long after this film broke, and he said that we're going to do a film about the next 2 money. What do you think? And I think I said yes because I've seen so many things, because it just felt so important to me. It felt like it was an end in our history. I felt at the time, and I sort of hoped I was right, that this would change everything. I could say now, sort of 2 years on, thinking that maybe it hasn't changed everything as quickly as we hoped. But anyway, it just felt like a paradigm shift to me. And I think like probably any other woman, and many men as well, I have experienced versions of it. I mean, I have to say that I'm fortunate enough never to have experienced anything that these women have experienced. But, I think if you sat a bunch of friends around the table, most people would say, yeah, me too, literally. And, and since actually I started making this film, and particularly since it came out, I can't tell you the number of people that I know that I thought I knew well, and men, including men, who've come up to me and said, I've never told anybody this before, but yes, when I was a student or in my first job, or it tends to be younger, when you're more vulnerable to power structures, and you may be terrified to speak out because you feel you might lose your job, and actually you might well lose your job. So it's those stories that just made me feel, I have to do this. This is about me. It's about everybody. It's about every woman. It's about many men. It's about anybody who's been a victim of the abuse of power. And this film, even though it is obviously about sexual and emotional abuse, it's really about the abuse of power. And Harvey Weinstein, he's an absolute, and there are many others, of course, but he is symbolic of that. He was at the top of his profession. He wielded so much power. He could make and break people, almost literally. So, yeah.
And I think that certainly, watching the film, that comes out, absolutely. He's even physically a huge man, a bully of a man by all accounts. And I think, it is very real, that sort of feeling of, especially for young women who have to, let's face it, try so much harder and fight harder for every gain that they can get on the ladder, and even into the industry itself. And it's a very real threat that, you're told when you start out, look, if you don't survive, there's 50 people behind you who'll take that job. And that's really a real thing. And there's so many powerful testimonies in the film, and so many sort of, quotes that you can take out of that. But, the most powerful, I think, really, I think every woman really, and her story really gave that sense of sort of helplessness in the situation, which, frankly, is just very true to life. And, I think it's definitely something that I have to say, most women I know, have a Me Too story.
They do, yeah, they do. And going back to him, I mean, that thing about you will never work again. I mean, it's almost ridiculous that people would say things like that. It just feels so hyperbolic and grandiose and ridiculous. But he meant it, and we now know, since the story came out, we know that he did stop people from working. I think Mira Sorvino and Ashley Judd, there are directors like Peter Jackson in New Zealand who came out and said, I was told by Harvey via Miramax, whatever Weinstein company, specifically not to hire them. But there are other more insidious ways as well. I think Rosanna Arquette, who's in the film, felt also that she had been sidelined. And actually, if you look at her career, she does some great stuff now, but she kind of disappeared for a while. And she was, Rosanna Arquette, in the 90s, she was Rosanna Arquette. She was so powerful and gorgeous. And then she was in Pulp Fiction. And she said that was because Tarantino wanted her. But then kind of out in the cold for a long, long time. But as she said, it's very difficult because unless a director turns around or a producer turns around and says, yeah, you know, Harvey told me not to hire you. It's very difficult because there are ways in which it can be said, like, oh, she's difficult to work with. You know, those kind of rumors that go around.
Yeah.
True, and people think, oh God, not having her, she's a nightmare, she's rude to everybody or whatever. So it's easy to spread those seeds of doubt about people, but no doubt he did. And from what I've been told, there are many, many people in this story who feel that they can never go public. But I think there certainly are people, you know, anecdotally that I've heard who definitely were told, don't hire her.
Yeah.
And those careers just, you know, they burnt brightly for a while in the 90s, for example, and then, you know, it's been very hard for them. And a lot of those women have told me that they've lost obviously a great deal of money, they've lost, you know, their dreams of really making it as an actor. Paz de la Huerta feels that she was sidelined after he raped her twice, she says. So, you know, it is real. And even assistants, again, we spoke to people who he made threats against their families. You know, it's like, I know where your brother works.
Yeah.
Which, you know, even if it's not true, it's so insidious. And so it would make you, I mean, you can imagine the stress that you'd feel. And then, you know, a lot of people might say, well, why didn't they just leave? Or, you know, why didn't they just leave that hotel room or whatever? But it's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's not that simple. It's really not.
And if you're a young person, we spoke to many, many of Harvey's assistants, both recent and in the past, and particularly the recent ones. You know, they were like, we'd go and have a drink with them or a coffee, and they'd pour out all these dreadful things that had been happening to them. And then they'd say, but, you know, I can't really talk about this because I don't want to be seen as a troublemaker, and I'm just at the beginning of my career and I'm working my way up. And I think that goes across many industries. People don't want to be seen as the troublemaker.
Yeah.
And even a big name director that I spoke to, who told me again awful stories about her treatment. She said, and I said, can you go on camera and talk about that? And she said, you know, it's hard enough to raise finance for your films at the moment. You know, it's difficult. I think now, you know, if you were making this film now that he's in jail, then I think it would be quite different because people.
Yeah.
But, you know, you have to remember at the time we were making it, which was not long after he had been arraigned. Well, it was around that time we started making it. People were frightened, you know. And I think as time went on, they began to think, well, maybe he's not going to go to jail. You know, maybe he is.
Really felt like a real sort of threat in a way.
Yeah.
But I guess, you know, and so with that in mind, you know, making a documentary that is, you know, so close to this sort of breaking and ongoing investigation, what are the challenges to that? You know, I can imagine the legals are a nightmare.
Yes. Yes, of course, in our dreams, you know, Harvey would have taken part in the film.
Right, exactly.
Never going to do, but you know, and I had this kind of ongoing list which I kept on my laptop of questions that I was going to ask him. You know, as they popped into my mind, I'd keep this kind of running list. So yeah, so we had to, you know, we are obliged, obviously, to get a right of reply. So we contacted him several times during the making of it and said, why don't you talk to us? And his lawyer would always come back going, he's too busy. I think he wasn't too busy. I think he was
in rehab or something.
Preparing his case, you know. So yeah, so we had to get a right of reply from him. But as I remember, actually, he never, you know, towards the end of the edit, we, as you would do with anyone that you were accusing of crime, effectively, or misdemeanors, you know, we sent them a list, a very, very detailed list of every single allegation in the film, and which did not reply. Bob, we also did the same because Bob Weinstein, his brother, there was an allegation from people in the film that he was kind of complicit in some way. So again, we had to put that to him. And actually, to be fair to Bob, we did meet him. And, you know, he did consider doing an interview, which would have obviously been absolutely brilliant. I think, you know, I know that we've fallen apart I think their relationship was pretty much shot to pieces several years ago. You know, I don't know.
Has he given an interview? I don't think I've seen one. I think
he hasn't. I think he sort of wrote a kind of first-person piece in something like Vanity Fair, sort of completely cutting, just absolutely sort of, saying I know, my brother doesn't exist for me anymore. But certainly, anyway, he didn't take part in our film after the various comings and goings, and I think that's because he would have spoken to his lawyers, who probably said, are you mad? Don't be ridiculous. But I think apart from anything else, I would have loved to have him in the film, just to ask them about their childhood, because I was very interested in their, where does this all come from? I don't believe people are born monsters. I believe that things happen and maybe they have character traits, but to happen in your family and the circumstances of your upbringing. So I would love to have been able to find out more, and that was disappointing. But sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think at one point in the film, when we look at the background of Harvey through school, and I think you touched on the fact that he was sort of an insecure child with his looks and his sort of size, and it kind of made it seem like it was born, his personality and aggression was born out of this idea that he had to elevate himself beyond those obstacles and sort of be a power player in that sense. Perhaps.
Yeah, I think he was, he was born to a working class family. I mean, he says they had a good upbringing. I have heard different versions of that, but again, go on the record. And I think he saw himself as a kind of street fighter. And at that time, Hollywood had been very. Somebody described it to me as like guys in suits, eating sort of. Drinking green juice smoothies in the morning and going to the gym at 5 a.m. And he was so much the antithesis of that. And he and his brother were these kind of like pugnacious New Yorkers. And they just were so different, and they didn't talk all that kind of LA bollocks. And I think, he saw himself, I saw him on a French talk show actually, and he was making some kind of biblical analogy. I think it might have been Spartacus or something, had to storm the walls of the temple or the castle because they weren't going to let him in the regular way. So he had to, for a while, he was super successful at doing that. And he, I think people say in the film, Miramax in the 80s and the 90s was the place to work, because he was hiring young renegade, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. Good Will Hunting would never have been made without him. Would we have seen all those subtitled independent Italian French films without him? He brought art house into the multiplex, and that is an amazing thing. And I think
it's so cool. And that part of Untouchable, where you go back through the history of Harvey and Bob growing up, but also of Miramax and what they created, and a sort of it was almost a brand that they created around themselves, and a brand bubble that people drank the Kool-Aid and they just wanted to be there. And you get that sense of how exciting that was at that time. They were real disruptors.
Absolutely, there were industry disruptors, and we've seen many of those in tech companies. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because in Silicon Valley, we're now really learning a lot about the kind of the abusive behavior of some of those, those CEOs and those founders. And, I don't know what it is, getting rich too fast, believing that somehow you're invincible, but kind of going back to him, he was the ultimate disruptor. And I think for a while he did it very well. Of course, as we know from the film, I think his sort of dark side, the dark secrets of his abuse and his rape of women, was way at the beginning, and I don't buy this thing that just as he gained power, he became, he did, I think, abuse more and more as he gained power, but I think it was something there from the start, which is why the childhood is so interesting.
And certainly, I think within the movie, it strikes a really great balance between, that context of the man and the company and, the way he surrounded himself, and then giving ample space for each woman to tell their story. And, I'm interested, when you sort of planned out that narrative for the film, how do you make sure that it you don't give too much time to Harvey, and make sure that there's enough time empowering the victims, to talk about that, and perhaps there's, did it come about quite naturally, or were there sort of hard decisions made in the edit process?
No, it's a really good question, because I think finding that balance was actually really difficult. And you can imagine a story like that, you could cut it different ways, you could have a time narrative where you go back and forth in time. I think, in the end, we did keep it quite chronological in a way, relatively speaking, because it's such a complicated story.
Yeah.
In terms of the balance, ultimately, I think what you take away from the film is these incredible testimonies of, very, very courageous people, including men, I have to say. But what we felt from the start is kind of going back to what I'm saying about, his sort of dazzling brilliance. I almost hate to use those words now, but I think it's kind of important to recognize that he was a
star himself,
in a very sort of primal way, and he kind of, he created this exciting place. So I think before we really started telling those stories, we had to understand the power he had over people in order to be able to put them in that situation. And the reason why people stayed there and shut their mouths and didn't say anything. And I think in terms of employees, there's a lot of people who rode on the coattails, and people you will see today, who've had major posts in major studios and have built their careers from being at Miramax. Somebody said to me it was like a boot camp, but it was the best boot camp when you were on that train.
Yeah.
Metaphors here, but when you're on that train, it was a good train to be on. And I remember somebody saying once to me, you might come into the office in the morning and he'd be like, we're going to Cannes, or we're going to London tonight, or we're flying to Brazil, or, whatever it was. And he had this private plane and you'd all jump on. So I think
that's so exciting, isn't it? When you
and I think someone else says in the film, he created this atmosphere around him, this world where we're in the center of the universe. And I think for a short time, he was.
Yeah. And, and again, sort of touching on what you were saying about and the men and including, when you're on that train, one of, obviously, like I said before, there's so many different powerful testimonies in the film. But one of the really striking things that has really stuck with me since was actually one of his male ex-colleagues, employees, who very candidly and I think very courageously shared the fact that a friend of his who he suggested for a job at Miramax was assaulted by Harvey, and at the time he didn't do anything about that, and that's something that he has to reconcile with every day, and that just really stuck with me because yes, this is a story, and the Me Too movement is sort of empowered women to talk about that, but when it was all unfolding, sort of 2017, 2018, I remember distinctly being in the pub with my group of friends and girls and boys, and we're all saying, well, yeah, this happened to me and this happened to me, and the guys sat there going, God, really, like that actually happened, somebody said that, oh my God. And it was sort of a bit of a wake-up call for them, to sort of say, one, I just had no idea that these things were sort of so prevalent, and these are the things that you deal with on an everyday basis just so normally, and the other was for them to kind of take a moment and think, God, have I ever said anything that I didn't realize wasn't okay, but it's not okay. It was really a moment for reflection for a lot of men as well, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember sitting down with my son, who was a teenager, but at the age where they're going out with girls, and sitting around the table not long after the scandal broke, with a group of his friends, and they're all lovely, lovely young men. And I said, how, what are you feeling about all of this? And they said, we're scared. Why are you scared? You're not going to do. And they said, yes, but we just, we don't want things to be taken the wrong way. And we're worried about what we might say now and whether it might, be misconstrued or whether we do actually say the wrong thing. And so we talked about it a lot. And I think we're talking about the fact that it was very much about communication and for young people to for young women to feel that they can be clear about what they want and what they don't want, and young men to respect that. So I feel hopeful because I do think that a lot of young people have kind of taken that on board. And then at the same time, there's massive amounts of porn, which obviously is horrific kind of objectification of women and, and again, men. But just going back to your question about the guy in the film, there were a couple of men who sort of felt that they really felt that they had some kind of complicity in this, whether or not they knew exactly. I mean, that particular guy did, he knew what was happening. And you remember in the film, a letter had come to the firm from a solicitor's, an attorney's office, saying that they're going to sue Harvey for sexual assault of this young woman. So he clearly knew. And yes, sort of however many years later, he's now turning around and going, yeah, I feel terrible about that. And, that decision with me. But again, it goes back to this complicated grey area of your career, your future against whistleblowing. And not many people in life have the courage to do that.
No.
And what I hope is that, people will see this film and many other films and the Jeffrey Epstein thing that's on Netflix.
Yeah.
That would maybe make them feel, I can do this, if these young women can do this. And because I think the Time's Up movement tried to embrace women from many other spheres of work, whether you're a farm worker or a factory worker or working in the fast food industry or in the service industry, you too may be subjected to many of the same kind of abuses of power, but you don't have a voice. People in the media, and I'm not saying it's easy for them, but they have a platform. If you're an actress, you're a Zen Rocket, you have a platform. You can go on Twitter or on TV and people will listen to you. Whereas, if you're working in somewhere very, with a lot less kind of profile to people, it may be that no one's going to hear your voice, and maybe there's no one in the company to hear your voice. So where are you going to go? Are you going to go to the police? It's so difficult. So I do think what I really hope is that, courage is very, it's also infectious, courage. And I feel myself, I feel like I have more of a voice now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you've gone through that and you now can speak out about it. And then going back to them too, and I think it is a dual thing. Men have got to support women in this. And, I'm sure there are men who probably have done things that they look back and think, and if they come out now and apologize, is someone going to, retrospectively take them to court? It's very, very complicated. And there are a tiny proportion of things where there have been false accusations. So, it's really, really complicated. But I think in general, when people accuse people of this kind of thing, it's absolutely true. And you have to believe them. You have to listen to them.
Absolutely. And I just want to second that. I think from an empowerment point of view, 100%, the hashtag Me Too and Time's Up, it really, I felt the strength of the collective coming together in a way that, probably was missing a little bit before. And that idea of women really coming together to support one another. But I think it's true that, in some parts of the world, the challenges to the Me Too movement are that, like you say, if you don't work in media, if you work in a business that the media doesn't find interesting to talk about, then you have less of a platform. If, you know, maybe you're a woman of color, and, you know, you feel less represented in some ways, you know, by the movement in your sort of area. And then, yeah, again, you know, it's easy to pass it off as something that is Hollywood or US centric. And that's why it's, you know, like we said in the beginning, it's so important that, and it's so fantastic that, you know, this film has made it, you know, across the world, and it's, you know, being shown to audiences and communities everywhere, because it really is so important. And, you know, I guess my question is, you know, for our viewers, you know, in this part of the world, have you had, what are the positives that you've heard from, you know, whether it be Australia or Asia, you know, the people who've reached out to you in response to the film?
Yeah, well, I think it was at the Sydney Festival. It was in a festival in South Korea, Women's Festival. And I sadly didn't have the chance to go to those festivals. But, you know, I know there were lots of Q&As and stuff. And actually, I had, a few months ago, I had an email via LinkedIn or something. Somebody tracked me down. And it just made me want to cry. It was this young woman. She was Australian, and she grew up on a sheep farm in the middle of nowhere. I can't even remember where it was, but, you know, a long way from sort of Hollywood, I guess.
Yeah.
But she had briefly lived in LA, and she's a young woman. So this has been going on recently, and she said, I watched this film and I recognize this behavior because these kinds of things had happened to me. And she said it just made me feel, you know, it just made me feel so much better that I knew it wasn't just me. And I've had people in Paris tell me that, you know, I've had people from all over the place tell me that. And she said a very sweet thing. She was setting up a new software company, something to do with the film business. And she said, I just want you to know that if in the future you ever come across this particular software that I've built and launched, that you'll think of a young girl from a sheep farm whose film touched.
That's awesome.
And I mean, to me, that's just the best news.
Yeah.
Because going back to the Hollywood thing, you know, they've spoken out, these women. They are wonderful, courageous women, but it has to now go beyond that.
Yeah.
And if it can touch 1, 2, 3, you know, 100,000 people, who then maybe encourage their friends, their moms to either see a film like this or to talk about it, that's a good thing, because it is the first step. And, you know, and let it be said that with Harvey, people were trying to break the story for years and years and years. You know, you can see in the film that various journalists had elements of the story, but they couldn't get anyone to actually go on the record, which goes back to the fear thing and the intimidation.
Yeah.
And finally, when they did, and that incredibly brave woman who wore the tape,
yes,
for the NYPD, and anyway, that's the whole story. If you ever read Ronan Farrow's book, Catch and Kill, because he's the guy who got the tape. But
yeah.
You know, it took a long time. So these things don't happen overnight, but just like you say, the collective voice of people coming together, supported by men as well as women.
Yeah.
To me, that's what it's all about, you know, and it's about all other sort of industries and parts of society.
Absolutely. You know, and
it's about all of us. It really is.
Yeah, no matter where you are. And you know, I think one thing to highlight is, you know, so many gains have been made since the sort of the amplification of #MeToo. But it's still, you know, it's still a battle, you know. There are things that, you know, even COVID and lockdown and the, you know, we have to remember that this is also not necessarily a workplace thing, but also, you know, a personal thing that can happen at home with domestic violence and with, lockdown and coronavirus. You know, those statistics of domestic violence going up so sharply are frightening. And I suppose, you know, without the sort of transparency of resources, you know, or safe havens that are kind of, you know, clearly demarked for women to go to, then it's that fear factor, like you say, is something that really can detract and still feel like an obstacle to people coming out and saying, hey, you know, I need some help.
Yeah, for sure. And, social services, and certainly in this country, social services resources have been cut. And, there's a lot of people who run helplines and stuff. But yeah, I mean, domestic violence is obviously huge. And actually, I think sort of going back to Harvey, when the trial happened, I think one of the things I found so gratifying was there was that woman who'd accused him of raping her and abusing her, even though they had had a relationship. That relationship, it probably wasn't a very equal relationship for quite a long time. And I think it's absolutely groundbreaking that the jury believed her, and they accepted the fact, they acknowledged the fact that abuse and rape can happen within a relationship where continues to see this person. We know that plays out in everyday life, in relationships where the woman is frightened of the man and tries to leave, but finds herself being drawn back. And that is a phenomenon, and it's particularly a thing in issues of abuse. That is a classic reaction to the trauma of being abused, that you just feel, because you get ground down and you have no self-esteem, and that's what the story was all about. And I think the fact that they convicted him on that was just like, I wanted to punch the air, because I felt that was a real paradigm shift.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the judgments, I thought that's the one that's going to hopefully change the way juries, but then the public. Remember, his lawyer really, really drilled into that, oh, well, it was just, what is she talking about? She willingly went back to see him. Look at her emails. She calls him Dear Harvey, just deliberately ignoring the fact that is such a feature of trauma, of the trauma of being abused. So, yeah.
It's heavy stuff. And, like you say, it's so difficult to really talk about, and for people to sort of believe you. And I just want to sort of touch on, we had a question there from an audience member who's asking, what did you do to create a safe space for people to talk about it? I mean, it must have been quite difficult to get people on the record until the very last minute. And how did you convince them that, this is a good thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, the women were, some of the women were very keen to talk, because I think, this film was made after the big revelations in the New York Times and the New Yorker. So, in that sense, others had gone before them. I'm not saying it's easy for them, because it wasn't, but at least they, there was a precedent of people before them, and I think they felt right. And there's a woman in the film called Hope, who's just the most wonderful, beautiful woman, who was raped by Harvey 40 years ago, and had literally never spoken about it to anybody. I think she'd alluded it to maybe some next door neighbors, but she hadn't told her husband, and that marriage eventually broke up. She hadn't told her sisters, her brother. And so I think for her to take part was such a huge thing. But she was, she's tiny. I think she says that in the film, and he's huge, but she's tiny, and she sort of turned up and just feels like this, almost bird-like figure, and then tells this story with such kind of courage and passion is the wrong word, but determination. And that was really hard for her. And in terms of creating a safe space, what we tried to do was, we had 2 cameras, but we blacked everything out so that there was sort of created like a little kind of tent area, if you like. So the person could see was me and and the DOP, the photographer, and that's all they could pretty much see. And everybody was sort of behind, out of vision, which I try and do that normally anyway, but in this case particularly, I didn't want them to feel they were sort of talking to this big audience.
Yeah.
Ultimately they are, but to make it feel as intimate as possible. And, and we spent time with them beforehand. If we couldn't meet them beforehand, we would Skype with them. My producer, Poppy, physically went to see a lot of them, and I would always catch up with them as well. And
so important to create a rapport with people before you interview them in these scenarios.
Yeah, I think so too. I've always tried to do that. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes we come into a film at the last minute and it's just okay, let's talk. But many of those women, I mean, Lauren, who is the woman at the end, the red-haired woman who talks about writing the memo, which actually triggered the New York Times.
Yeah.
She's the sort of whistleblower. And it was very, very hard for her. She came on at the last minute because she was terrified. She going public like that was very, very difficult for her. She got caught up in legal stuff, and she's talked about this quite a lot now. And I hope she felt empowered by doing it, but it was hard for her. So it wasn't just the people, I say just, it wasn't just the people who'd been abused. It was also other people who had, taken that step to talk about abusive practices within the company, even if it wasn't affecting them. But there's one story I remember that there was a woman who was telling us about what happened to her, and then she said, I really became frightened of men after this, and I sort of cut all my hair off and became quite nun-like in my behaviour.
Right.
And she said, I actually find it really difficult. I found it really difficult to be around any men at all. And I was sort of thinking, gosh, she's met all the crew, and that day we had a lot of females in the crew, but that day the sound recordist was a man. And so I thought to myself, while she was saying all this in the interview, I thought, oh gosh, I hope this is okay for you. And afterwards I said, look, I hope that was all right. There were men here. And she said, oh, yeah, fine. I've got to, I'm through this, and I'm married again, and everything is fine. And so I thought, okay, phew. And afterwards, she'd gone, and the sound recordist, this lovely, lovely guy, came up to me and said, I just want to thank you for letting me hear this, because, it's a privilege, because we men never get to hear this kind of thing.
Right, exactly.
He said, to sit in this room and hear this woman, and it's obviously awful, but I feel it's a privilege for me as a man because no one says this to us publicly. So that was good. I felt, okay, going back to my theme of wanting men to get involved in this and to get on board with changing things, I thought that was very powerful. But,
really powerful. And have you had the opportunity to speak to any of the women in the film since the camera stopped? How have they reacted to the film?
Yeah, no. We've kept in touch with all of them, particularly around the launch of the film on Hulu in the US, and then it went out on the BBC here. So and then there are various festivals at which some of the women went and spoke on the platform afterwards, which was just brilliant. The audience was so interested in what they had to say. So yes, we still keep in touch with some of them, either on Instagram or whatever.
Yeah.
They've been through a roller coaster, because obviously since that time he's been convicted, he's gone to jail. There was this whole thing about the settlement, the class action, which has gone a bit sort of skew whiff, because the judge doesn't want it to be a class action, and denied his sort of thing. His attempt. And that's really been very difficult this week for some of them. So in touch, I think at the time of it coming out, I think it was very difficult for some of them, but they've all supported the film.
Wonderful, and I think, like you say, it sort of bonds everyone together to take part in these things and share their truths with other people who've gone through similar situations. And even the sound guy listening for the first time, just everybody, it's kind of, I fail to see how anyone cannot be sort of changed by the knowledge that these things sort of go on. But with that, I want to sort of I want to take a quote from Rolling Stone when they were talking about Untouchable, the film. And they said, to quote, "The fact that it took decades to finally hold him accountable, this Harvey Weinstein, for such pathological and destructive behavior speaks to how Hollywood and society at large allowed these things to continually happen time and time again." And I think, that's so true even now, that, it feels like there's a sexual abuse scandal rocking the world every few months. And it's not just against women, it's Harvey Weinstein, the other Hollywood names that have been brought to bear because of Me Too, whether that's Kevin Spacey, to Michael Jackson, to Jeffrey Epstein, to R. Kelly, to Larry Nassar of the US gymnastics team.
Yeah.
So, what
the yoga guy,
Yeah, oh God, yeah, the yoga guy. What do you think of documentary filmmaking as a platform for advocacy?
I mean, yeah, I think it's one of the most powerful platforms, because I think, I think somebody said this around the time the film came out, but, we've all read a lot of those women's testimonies, the amazing work in the New York Times and New York, we've heard some of those testimonies, we've heard similar things. So in a way, the kind of content of it is maybe not so surprising to people. But I think seeing their faces, I think that's what documentary can do and film can do.
Yeah.
Is you see their faces and you see, it's kind of what they don't say as well. You see it in the silences and the just finding it so hard to find the words and yet wanting to say it and then saying it, and how that, I think that speaks volumes. I really do, and I think the human face is always the most powerful way. And I think, I didn't want to make a polemic film, a sort of call to arms in that sense, but it is a call to arms, because I think when you've heard their stories, you can't help but be moved, and I hope moved to try and do something about it in your world, in your small way or big way or whatever way is available to you.
Yeah.
I think that's the power of film, and it goes beyond words,
Absolutely. And for us, I wonder, we're in the office, we're obviously watching documentaries, but we sort of inhale podcasts as well, and all these things. And there are some great podcasts, which, Ronan Farrow's Catch and Kill, is a great companion to the thing. But at the same time, it's great for, completely as you say, it's great for the story, but and you get the idea, but it really not until you see that person's face that you can connect with them on this sort of more human level than just hearing it as a story, that you're still somewhat detached from.
Yeah, for sure. And even if you're only seeing them in a photograph, there's a bit of the film where the story comes out and we see pictures of Ashley Judd and Rose McGowan and Ambra, the NYPD tape, and it's just looking at those faces, and in many cases those young faces. And I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, when people hear the words Gwyneth Paltrow and Angelina Jolie, and I think there might have been at the beginning a bit of, oh well, isn't that what you expect in Hollywood? Yeah. And they're rich and famous anyway, so why was that? Oh dear, they lost a part in a film. But what you see is that a lot of these women were really young at the time, and they're just young women. They just need to get a break. Arriving in Hollywood with no money, literally just randomly sitting next to him at a party, dinner. Oh, I'm going to make you the next Erica, who's in our film, the dark-haired lady who you see in the film. I think he said to her, I'm going to make you the next Sandra Bullock. I mean, it's intoxicating if you're like 21 years old or something, you hear that. So I think it's seeing those young faces in the photographs of them. Oh, that's clever. Yeah. You see their young faces, and, that's like 15 years on now for her, but you're just trying to imagine her at that age. And I think you see everything in those faces.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really so true, when you start out, but it can happen at any level of your career, I'm sure. And you mentioned you were talking to some filmmakers and directors, who later on in their career still face these obstacles and threats to their careers in some way, of being sidelined if you don't sort of toe the party line. But then what would your what would your advice be as we wrap this up? What would your advice be for female filmmakers who are just starting out in the industry? To be, how can they find themselves being taken more seriously in what's otherwise considered a male-dominated world?
Well, I mean, it's really interesting you say that, because we had the BAFTA nominations for not for the film awards, obviously, for the TV awards and the craft. So, the behind the camera stuff, directing, photographers and stuff like that. And I'm part of a doc women's group called We Are Doc Women. And we were just, when they came out, we were just absolutely appalled, because across the board, particularly in the craft, they were white male, pretty much. I mean, people of color, black and brown people, even more poorly represented, but very few women. And as we know, there's a lot of women in the business doing really good work. It is a bit of an uphill battle, but there's lots of people fighting that corner. And I think, we can't compare it to the murder of George Floyd, but I think that terrible story and the protest has brought out a real sense of the need for change. And so we were sort of, in that vortex. So we wrote this letter to, kind of an open letter with many women's voices on it, asking for, talking about gender and race equality, because that's just as bad, if not worse. So I think there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of BAFTA. There's a new chair. So that's the British Academy. There's a new chair now who is really, really, really believes in change. And I think, people have talked for years. There's been schemes, there's been initiatives, there's been quotas, and it hasn't really changed. Certainly in terms of gender, there's always been an ambition to get 50-50, but it still isn't the case. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. So what I would say to young female filmmakers is be determined. It is change, but you need to sort of go into it with a sense of, a friend of mine who's a producer that always said to me, think like a man, Ursula. I don't really want to think like a man. No offense to men. I'm a woman, and I think maybe, there are differences between us sometimes and our approaches to things. So I think you can retain your feminine qualities, whatever those are, female qualities, and still, and do as good work. But I think there's been a stereotype for a long time of the kind of confident, visionary male director, which goes back to cinema, and we all know those people who are great. I think there's a lot of women who maybe go about their work a little bit differently, but are capable of making just as powerful and inspirational things. So we have to get in there. We have to just keep doing good work, but knock on doors and be confident. I think maybe this is a bit controversial, but I think sometimes we are our own worst enemy. We don't shout loudly enough about our skills. And and I have obviously lots of male friends in the industry, and I love them, and they're wonderful. But sometimes the difference is that they just like, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. Whereas I think
take it or leave it.
Can have a bit more of a tendency to sort of, oh well, maybe I'll compromise because there's not enough money or this and that. Whereas a lot of men just go, right,
and it reminds me of that sort of thing that does the rounds that everyone likes to quote, but it's really true. When you see a job application posting, and there might be 10 things that they require, a man will look at that and go, oh, I've got 3, so that's enough, I'll apply. And a woman will look at that and go, oh, I've got all of them but 3, so there's no point. And you've just really got to back yourself and just really go for it. But the confidence and it takes time, I think, to sort of to really show up with that. But what I found really great, and to your point, We Are Doc Women just sounds fantastic. And when I was in London, being part of groups like Women in Film and TV, there's fabulous Facebook groups, just for women to say, hey, I've got a DP job, or hey, I've got this, and can anybody help me out? And it's finding a sort of supportive community and a group that you feel really, comfortable with, that really builds your confidence, I think, to say, you know what, I've got this.
Absolutely. And I think there movements like this, groups like this all over the world. And, you know, anyone out there, I'm sure you can find one in your community, or maybe start one, build it. You know, this one's in someone's living room with kind of 5 people going, how can we change things? You know, and it's now sort of breaking off into parents groups and racial equality groups and sexual, you know, gender equality groups. So, you know, I feel very sort of positive about all of that. And, you know, the other thing I would say is that older, you know, more experienced female directors should be mentoring young. You know, I have a lot of people who contact me now, and I'll always, if I possibly can, give them an hour or half an hour of meeting for coffee in pre-COVID days, and hopefully in the future, or do a Zoom with them, because I think, you know, when I was in my 20s, 30s, you know, I had nothing like that. I don't remember anybody really reaching out to me and saying, or just not knowing that it was there. Maybe it was there and I just didn't know, but there were fewer women doing that work. So I think mentoring is good. And then, like, going out and hiring. I mean, Ava DuVernay, and who I have a massive crush on, you know, she just says, she's like, there is a solution to this. Hire more women.
Yeah.
Hire more women, because, you know, if they're not going to get the chance to, you know, push themselves forward, it's not going to happen. So it's down to people with power, obviously, but then I think it's also we just have to, you know, we just have to be strong. We have to, even if you feel really, and we all have mornings and days, and me and everybody has days where you just feel a bit shit and you think, oh, you know, I can't do this, and I might have been doing this for years, but, you know, imposter syndrome and all of that. And I think you've just got to take a deep breath and believe in yourself and surround yourself with good people. That's my number 1, maybe number 2 thing. Work with people.
And that's it. And that's such a great place to sort of end on, because it's honestly, it's really inspirational. And I think it's, you know, I really thank you for being so candid about that, because, you know, the more we talk about it, the more we say, hey, look, it can be hard, but we're here for you. And, you know, it's just such a, you know, I think we can be the change that we want to see. So,
yeah.
So I think that's it. That's time. That's a wrap.
Thank you. It's been lovely talking to you, and I hope everybody's, you know, out there has, you know, hope you get to see the film, and, you know.
Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Ursula.
Take care. Bye.